Andrew Wade, a World War II veteran, and his young family were looking for a home in the suburbs. There was just one problem. Andrew and his family were black, and those peaceful suburbs reserved for whites only. No coloreds allowed. This was Kentucky in 1954. A savvy real estate agent suggested a workaround: have a white person buy a home and then transfer the deed to him. So Andrew turned to his friends, Carl and Ann Braden, for help. The deal was struck, but instead of a fresh start, terror awaited them. From hostile stares from their neighbors to open hostility, things turned violent. A racist message shattered their windows, gunshots rang out, and a burning cross stood on their lawn. Just when they thought it couldn't get any worse, dynamite exploded beneath their daughter's bedroom, destroying half their home. When law enforcement finally stepped in, they arrested not the people behind the bombing, but their friends who helped secure the home. This nightmare forced Andrew and his family to abandon their dream and return to the very inner city they hoped to escape. It didn't have to be this way. Cities were vibrant communities where blacks, whites, and other races met, creating new rich societies. Take the poet Langston Hughes, for instance. He grew up in a diverse Cleveland neighborhood where he dated a Jewish girl in high school and his best friend was Polish. This was the environment in many urban areas throughout the country. There was no reason that this trend couldn't have continued into the suburbs. Yet, American cities and suburbs took a dark turn when the US government decided not all citizens deserved the American dream. Through targeted rules and economic sanctions, it pushed down one segment of the population while propping up the other. This is an urbanist channel, not the history channel. There's so many urbanist topics I want to cover, but in order to comprehend the present and possible future of our cities, you need to understand the history of American cities. And unfortunately, racist policies have deeply shaped our present cities. You've been taught that segregation ended in the 60s. You've been told that today we are all equal in the eyes of the law. You have been lied to. You can see it in your commutes in and out of the city. Feel it each time you avoid certain neighborhoods. Unwillingly confronted each time you read or watch the news. Sure, the laws have changed, but the effects still linger. This is how the US government engineered segregation, breaking the ladder of prosperity in the black community and leaving our inner cities in decay. Welcome to CityPulse. To understand why many US cities have problematic inner cities, we need to look at the policies that pushed white prosperity and the origins of the American dream. Owning a home has always been a big part of that, a way to build a secure future. But how did this dream start? During the Great Depression, many families found themselves out of work and on the streets as they couldn't pay rent or make home payments. So FDR rolled in with two key initiatives. First, help the renters. The Public Works Administration started building public housing, but not the type you're thinking of. These homes had modern amenities and they were for good renters. Social workers checked applicants to make sure they had well-behaved kids, good furniture, and even a marriage certificate. Second, help the homeowners. In 1933, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, was created. Before the HOLC, buying a home meant paying 30 to 50% upfront, known as a down payment, and repaying the rest in 5 to 10 years to the bank. The HOLC changed that. At first, homeowners could renegotiate their bank loans with never before seen terms. Now, buyers only needed 10 to 20% upfront and could take 20 to 30 years to pay back the loan. The HOLC was able to make this happen by basically saying, "I got this!" to the banks if the homeowners failed to make the loan payments, also known as a loan guarantee. This was a great deal for all involved. The homeowners got to stay in their homes and make smaller monthly loan payments. Banks were safe, and the government stopped the housing crisis. This was such a great deal that in 1934, the Fair Housing Administration, FHA, was created to bring these wonderful loan options to new homeowners, creating the financial mechanisms of homeownership we use to this day. The first few steps of the wealth ladder were placed. Fast forward to World War II, many people move into the cities for wartime jobs, so the government builds more public housing. After World War II, a wave of soldiers come back wanting to buy homes thanks to the GI Bill. But there weren't enough houses, so to fix this, the government once again stepped in. The FHA started saying, "I got this!" to banks on loans supporting big housing projects. This led to suburbs like Levittown popping up all over the country. The final steps of the wealth ladder were placed. With plenty of housing to go around, the American dream started to take shape. The shape of living in a single family home with a white picket fence, a car in the garage, a dog in the backyard, and 2.5 kids running around. From 1940 to 1970, 72 million Americans became homeowners. This led to better family wealth, education, and health. The American dream was working, but not for everyone. They managed to plant the seeds of prosperity for one group, while planning the downfall of another. In the early 20th century, more minorities moved into white neighborhoods, so homeowners came up with a new kind of rule to stop them, called racial covenants. These rules stopped minorities from buying or living in certain homes. These restrictions were against various minority groups, but 100% of them targeted the exclusion of black people. In 1926, these racial covenants got the all clear from the Supreme Court in the Corrigan v. Buckley case, showing you that the Supreme Court has a long history of dropping the ball. During the Great Depression, the government created programs to help homeowners and renters, a plan that, as mentioned before, built the wealth ladder that the government didn't want minorities to be a part of. Let's take a second look at those government programs. The first program helped renters by building public housing, but they saw racial mixing as a tool of disharmony and built segregated housing. Yet, the cities had limited space, and contrary to what many of us might think, they were largely integrated. This wasn't due to the kindness of people or that they had higher values back then. It was due to circumstantial reasons. American whites, European immigrants, blacks, and other races needed work. Work was found in factories downtown. They didn't have cars, so they had to live within walking distance of work. So they ended up living roughly in the same neighborhoods. There were cultural tensions, as there always are when tribes first meet. But through familiarity, people that wouldn't have met. Misinformed preconceptions met reality. People who wouldn't have been friends started friendships. New ideas and experiences crossed families and cultures, enriching our cities. But all over the country, the Public Works Administration demolished integrated neighborhoods and built segregated housing, often creating segregation in areas where there was none. The second program helped homeowners by giving them affordable loans, but once again, there was a racist filter to their plan. They saw being black as a sign of untrustworthiness and dysfunction, so they didn't want to back a loan that would depend on someone untrustworthy paying it for a loan on a home that would be in disrepair. So to better guide banks making these loans, the HULC came up with helpful maps for all major cities. These maps would show the banks in what areas the government would feel safe saying, "I got this," and inform banks of the interest rates to charge under the level of risk in each area. Green areas were the best, with white families and racial deed restrictions. Blue meant good people, like white-collar families. Yellow meant a declining area, with working-class families. And red meant detrimental influences, hazardous, like foreign-born people, low-class whites, and in absolute terms, blacks. No loans were available for red districts. The maps claimed to care about the existence of polluting agents in an area, but there's so many examples that showed they considered race above all. One blatant example of this is a D6 section of the red-lined map for Springfield, Ohio, a red district surrounded by blue and green districts. If pollutants were an issue, you would see a gradual change in color as the source of the pollution decreases. A sharp jump between colors suggests that the pollutant wasn't something transferable, something like air or noise pollution, but a fixed characteristic. That fixed characteristic was race. Just by having a black population, a district was blocked from a powerful economic tool: bank credit. These government maps also encouraged the building of walls and barriers to separate the neighborhood. One example is the Birdwood Wall in Detroit, built to separate a black community from a white one. This wall still stands today as a reminder of the government's discriminatory practices. What sent these color-coded maps into overdrive was the FHA copying the HOLC's homework. They used their maps to also tell bank lenders in what areas the FHA would be willing to say, "I got this," when backing a new home loan. What did this look like in action? For white families, buying a home was easy. They needed smaller down payments and lower interest rates, but for black families, buying a home meant bigger down payments, higher interest rates, and higher monthly payments, making home ownership a significantly less realistic option for black families. Even if a black family could afford to buy a home in a white neighborhood, their presence could label the whole area as a red zone. The FHA would refuse to insure future mortgages, even to well-off white families. So even to those who didn't hold any prejudice, having a black neighbor was a financial, existential threat to them. And not to be outdone by the HLC, the FHA also made sure homes owned by blacks were valued less than those of whites. From their first underwriter's manual in 1935 all the way to 1968, the FHA let their racist beliefs shine. In their 1936 underwriter's manual, they wrote sections that said, to check the racial makeup of a location for the possibility of, quote, being invaded. That equated living near non-whites to living near a highway, a railroad, or a polluting industry. Then in the 1940s, more people moved into the cities for wartime jobs, so the government spread their segregation as public housing. After World War II, the government helped returning soldiers buy suburban homes. They did this by saying to loans for large multi-home construction projects. This increased the amount of houses available, but under the condition that all homes would have racial deed restrictions. These programs subsidized the white population of the United States and pushed them into homes in the suburbs. They did this by lowering barriers to home ownership, by making it easier to buy while increasing the supply of homes to keep prices accessible. In fact, these homes were so affordable that it was cheaper to pay a home loan than pay rent in public housing. It made perfect financial sense to abandon the cities for the homes in the suburbs. But, and I can't stress this enough, this financial scenario was only available to whites. In 1956, the Federal Highway Act, my old nemesis, hit the scene. It further fueled white flight, making it easier for people to leave the cities or the suburbs. Industries also moved to cheaper lands, leaving cities with fewer jobs. The outcome was those left in the cities were poorer and poorer, starting the process of vibrant cities turning into abandoned buildings and parking lots. At the same time, vacancies began to plague the white-only housing projects, while black projects faced long wait lists. Eventually, all the projects were open to black people. As wealth and jobs left the cities, the housing projects transformed into the slums that we know as public housing today, shaping the idea of what an American city would be for the following decades. Were white people just naturally more successful at climbing the economic ladder? By now, you should be able to say a resounding no. The government was able to pull those it wanted up while cutting down those it didn't. And the ripple effects of these actions are more surprising than what you'd ever imagine. Thanks to the HBO show Watchmen, most of us have heard about the 1921 bombing and destruction of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Thank you, pop culture, for teaching us more about history than our public schools. Well, that show got a few things wrong. Yes, an angry white mob destroyed the neighborhood, and yes, airplanes firebombed the city. But the neighborhood wasn't called Black Wall Street, and that event didn't wipe out that community. Despite the local government officials and law enforcement trying to prevent its revival, it came back bigger and better. And that's when it got its name, Black Wall Street. This community was so resilient that not even a government-sanctioned air raid could keep them down. Do you know what did kill it? A goddamn highway. All that is left is a handful of storefronts on either side of a small street next to a noisy highway. This was not the only instance of a highway destroying minority communities and acting as a barrier between the leftovers and the white neighborhoods. The reason often attributed to this is that land was cheap, so the highways came through to save money on expenses. The question now should be, why was that land cheap? And based on what we just covered, you know why. The government made it so that minority-owned land was cheap. In Nashville, officials added a curve to the I-40 to avoid a white neighborhood. Instead, they knocked down hundreds of homes and businesses in black neighborhoods. In Birmingham, planners did the same when routing I-59. In Detroit, I-375 went through the black neighborhoods of Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, neighborhoods that were once thriving, filled with hundreds of thousands of residents and businesses. Today, it's mostly empty plots of grass. Even in California, neighborhood homes of Jewish, Mexican, Black, and Japanese Americans were destroyed. Their homes in East LA, Boyle Heights, Pico, and Sugar Hill were taken to make way for I-5, I-10, US Route 101, US Route 60, and their many intersections. These projects were often sold as an opportunity for building better homes, and those displaced could find housing in better places. Imagine how hard it would be to try to find another neighborhood that wasn't deed restricted against the color of your skin. Could you find a landlord to rent to you? Or find another bank that would accept black business? Due to segregated housing, many were denied a home in other parts of the city, and often ended up close to the highways, no better off. The mayor of Atlanta in the 1950s even said the not-so-quiet part out loud when he said that the I-20 will serve as the boundary between the white and population on the west side of town. This history is everywhere. Try searching the name of a nearby highway in your city, followed by racism, and you will find the dark origin story of the highway you drive on every day. These are the physical manifestations of racist housing policies that continue to shape our cities to this day. Unfortunately, there's a deeper unseen layer. In the United States, home ownership is the primary driver of wealth. And who faced the biggest hurdles in achieving this dream? Minorities, especially black people, were often explicitly targeted by government restrictions. While some black families did manage to get a home, they faced higher financial barriers when compared to their white counterparts. Many turned to rent-to-own contracts. With these contracts, renters leased a property with an option to buy before the lease expires. Monthly payments covered rent and a small portion went towards the home's future purchase. This option emerged because it didn't involve banks. However, these contracts didn't offer the same wealth-building opportunities as traditional mortgages. Since the buyer's name wasn't on the deed, they couldn't build equity or tap into the home's value through loans. Plus, missing a single payment could mean losing both the property and all the money invested towards buying it. Even for those who managed to own a home, accessing its value was a challenge. Most banks refused to work with black owners, which denied them the opportunity to leverage their home's equity for wealth creation. Consider this. Black Americans make up roughly 13% of the US population. Imagine the economic landscape if they had been building generational wealth for the past 70 years. Instead, they faced economic setbacks and forced relocations from stable areas. Black communities were starved of credit. Those color-coded maps acted the same way as the economic sanctions governments put on perceived foreign enemies. They signaled to banks and to the markets that investments were off limits in these areas. This not only stopped home loans, but also prevented investments needed to maintain homes and neighborhoods. How can we expect communities to thrive when they're denied the resources they need? It's easy for an outsider to say, I did what I had to do for my neighborhood. Why can't they? When homeowners can't use their home equity to start or expand a business, it stops the local economy. Without enough funds for maintenance, neighborhoods fall apart, fulfilling the bleak predictions set out by those colorful maps. The government's policies made it financial suicide to live next to black families, creating barriers to integration. After years of protests and challenging the unjust system, the government changed its stance, but their reforms were a little too late. In 1968, the Fair Housing Act passed, granting blacks the rights to buy any home they could afford. It had the potential to kickstart national healing and foster a unified American culture. The transformation we saw in white communities could have been a shared experience for all. We often forget that the definition of white back then excluded many groups we now consider white. Back then, it was only people of Northern European descent. But being white started to include more groups as attitudes shifted through controversial marriages, cross-cultural friendships, and business collaborations. The building of common ground broke down untested prejudice. We saw many groups become one. Living alongside diverse cultures allows for genuine understanding. It enables us to see individuals for who they are rather than a stereotype assigned to a group. But that era slipped away for many who were part of that excluded minority. We didn't adjust devalued property prices coming from racist policies. We didn't rebuild destroyed business communities. We left credit-starved communities without access to credit lines. By the 1960s, home prices had soared when compared to black families' median income. Even when they were homeowners, blacks couldn't get access to their home wealth. Banks wouldn't work with them, deeming their devalued homes not worth the effort. Without the possibility of building ties between communities, barriers remained in place. It's as if we expected a desert to bloom without providing the necessary water. These policies segregated communities and stopped progress long after their enforcement. They left a legacy we still grapple with today in ways that few have connected the dots on. There's so much more to cover and there's only so much I can fit into this video. I had to leave a lot on the cutting room floor. If you're interested in taking a deeper dive into the topics I discussed, I've got some fantastic book recommendations. Starting with inspiration for this video, The Color of Law, which covers in much more detail the role the government played in implementing and spreading segregation. The Victory of Greenwood is for those interested in learning more about the inspiring story of Black Wall Street's resilience. Pick up where Watchmen dropped off and learn about their comeback story. The Most Segregated City in America uncovers how zoning was weaponized in Birmingham by segregationists and how it influenced civil rights planning. A captivating read for history buffs and city planning enthusiasts. The final book, Black, A Celebration of Culture, presents a vibrant tapestry of the 20th century Black culture in America, a reminder of the enduring cultural richness that has persisted despite the challenges faced by the Black community. A great addition to your coffee book collection. Check out the links in the description to grab these books. Let me know which one you pick in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. In 2023, the home ownership rate stood at 46% for Black families and 74% for white families. While both groups have experienced similar economic fluctuations over the past 20 years, a 25 to 30% gap remains. Excluding a community from home ownership has created fractures in our society. These fractures widen as they evolve from a wealth gap into a knowledge gap. For generations, some families have developed an understanding of the financial tools used to improve themselves. For those who were locked out of those financial tools, that knowledge never developed. That knowledge or lack of knowledge has been passed on from one generation to the next, creating the financial knowledge gap. This was taken advantage of in the years leading up to the 2008 financial crisis. For instance, the US Justice Department found that Wells Fargo had used redlining policies to charge higher interest rates to Black and Latino customers and push them into predatory loans. A New York Times article revealed loan officers referred to Black clients as mud people and exploitative loans as ghetto loans. The question isn't just why they did this, but how they were able to. The answer lies with the US government. Leading up to the Great Recession, the US government encouraged wolves to run free of punishment while weighing down their prey. What do I mean by this? In the 90s, aiming to boost home ownership, the government urged banks to relax lending practices. The FHA would start saying, "I got this," to riskier home loans. This seemed beneficial, increasing home ownership and propping up the American Ponzi scheme. See my previous video for more details. At some point, banks started to run out of people that could get a traditional home loan, so they started offering exotic options. Emboldened by the government's promise to bail them out regardless of what happened, they went headfirst into pushing junk loans. The wolves were taking risks they wouldn't have done without government support. Financially literate individuals could have smelled these bad loans a mile away. But there was a new customer base, unaware of standard lending practices, which allowed these banks to get away with selling false dreams in the form of risky loans. The wolves found their prey in a population that was unfamiliar with them. Weighed down by decades of economic destruction and isolation, they saw no risk. They let the wolves into their homes. Eager for an opportunity to climb the wealth ladder, people accepted these trash loans. The legacy of government segregation reared its head again. When things came crashing down in the 2008 financial crisis, those most vulnerable were devastated. Foreclosures swept through low-income neighborhoods, which erased what little wealth remained in America's inner cities. The result of segregationist policies is all around our cities. You can see it in the remnants of once thriving communities, in the carcasses of formerly rich business corridors impaled by a highway, and in the high crime rates of economically abandoned areas. Despite this, doubts persist if one can continue to blame these policies. Some argue that the era of government segregation is so far in the past that it shouldn't affect us today. To a degree, I understand their perspective. There are no longer legal barriers preventing people from obtaining loans, choosing where to live, or accessing financial tools. With determination and education, anyone can pursue their version of the American dream. Today, that dream can be anything you want. We've moved beyond the traditional American dream of a single family home with a white picket fence, a car in the garage, and a happy 2.5 kids. Most of us have said, the kids, my pets are my kids. Yes, the written racist bits have been removed, but the structures created by these racist policies continue to live on, and our present day problems continue to layer on top. Past policies continue to shape the state of our cities by how it shapes the state of its citizens. Government policies have resulted in a large part of the urban community, often people of color, to be politically and economically irrelevant, which has a huge impact when it's time to consider city policies. Metro bus systems go unfunded because no one uses them. Rail projects were torn down because no one used them. New rail projects are a pipe dream because no one will use them. Bike lanes are useless because no one will ride on them. We don't need shaded sidewalks everywhere because no one walks. Let me correct those statements. No one of political or economic importance would use those services. It's always an uphill battle anytime the cities want to invest in train, bus, or bike infrastructure. The infrastructure that would overwhelmingly benefit the urban population. This is because those fighting against it are car-owning suburbanites, people who are more likely to have the connections and wealth to back their stances. Suburbanites are both politically and economically relevant because old overturned segregationist policies made it that way. You yourself might be a victim of this system, regardless of your race or age. If you're struggling to find a place to live, it's mainly due to America's oppressive zoning laws, which also have racist origins. The biggest fans of these laws are the wealthy suburbanites that don't want change in their neighborhood, who have the connections and means to make sure no new housing is built. The American dream is further and further away from a growing number of us. But there's still hope. You can fight the system. I made this video to explain why many of our inner cities are in decay. To explain the source of the disorder, what I found was a government-created system that targeted individuals based on group identity, a system designed to suppress one group while elevating another. While the government has taken steps to remedy its past errors, the effects linger. Viewing it as an issue too vast for one person to tackle, many of us let it be. You might watch this video, share what you learned with a friend, and make a social media post, but I challenge you to do more. I challenge you to be the change you want to see. We need to make the people of the cities politically and economically relevant. It all starts with you. Educate yourself, become financially savvy, and understand your rights. Use your political and financial support for the development of city projects that would benefit the urban population. Don't let the fog of the suburbs cloud your judgment. Persistent, extraordinary individuals overturn the unjust system of segregation. You can continue their work, heal old wounds, and prevent history from repeating. While understanding our past is crucial, we must not let it hold back our future. The power of one individual is huge. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.